The Genital Autonomy, Legal Defense, and Education Fund, presented by Tim Hammond at the 16th International Conference on Child Genital Cutting, August 27th and 28th, 2022, in Atlanta, Georgia. So what exactly is a Legal Defense and Education Fund? Well, in the history of progressive civil and human rights movements in the U.S., LDEFs have been instrumental in advancing legal recognition of the rights of women, racial minorities, LGBTQI+ people, the disabled, immigrants, and other groups in need of greater protection under the law. Examples include Lambda Legal Defense, Gay and Lesbian Advocates and Defenders, the NAACP, and the National Organization of Women. LDEFs often raise money and initiate impact litigation that results in extending legal protections and securing rights for vulnerable persons. The legal defense fund that I have the most familiarity with is Lambda Legal, in which I was a member from the late 1970s onward, and Lambda has been responsible for every major legal advancement of LGBTQ rights in the U.S. for the past 50 years. This includes the Kammermeyer v. Perry case, which was a pioneering case that allowed for LGBT people to openly serve in the U.S. military, Lawrence v. Texas, which resulted in the overturning of state sodomy laws that once criminalized private adult sexual behavior, and the more recent case of Obergefell v. Hodges, in which the U.S. Supreme Court declared states' denial of marriage equality to same-sex couples was unconstitutional. Now, in the summer of 2022, Lambda launched a podcast series, and this 2-minute teaser caught my attention because in this teaser, which I'd like to play for you, they bring up some of the challenges and obstacles that we're facing the LGBT community in securing rights. And I found some of this to be quite instructive for us in the genital autonomy movement. And I think as you listen to this, I'd like you to pay attention to the bolded, underscored words on the screen, because those in particular, I believe, have a good deal of applicability to our movement.
Hi there, I'm Alex Berg, a journalist and host, and I cover all things LGBTQ+ and the issues that affect our community. I'm thrilled to share the launch of a new podcast series from Lambda Legal called Making the Case. On this podcast, we'll be pulling back the curtain on Lambda Legal's influential casework. On each episode, I'll sit down with a lawyer or two to discuss how they've successfully litigated some of the most consequential lawsuits impacting LGBTQ+ and HIV civil rights.
It's the biggest legal victory for people living with HIV in decades.
We're getting into all of it. We'll talk about the creative strategy Lambda lawyers used to set up and win their cases.
There are many types of medical care where some religions oppose that care, and there's not endless religious rights to deny a person the medical standard of care.
We'll talk about unique challenges and issues that add to the process.
At that time, public opinion didn't necessarily favor same-sex couples being able to marry. We knew that we were in an uphill battle with respect to public opinion, even in some of the bluest states in the country.
And finally, through their reflections, we'll talk about the drive necessary to win some of the most critical legal cases in American law of the past 50 years.
We can have the best legal arguments in the world, and if we're not doing the work outside of the courtroom so that people can be receptive, because as I always say, judges are people too, we need to create those conditions in which people can rethink things that they thought that they always knew to create the opportunity for us to have more freedom, more equality, better civil rights protections in ways that maybe we would have had in the past.
So, who is this podcast for? If you're interested in American history, politics, or civil rights, then this is the podcast for you. If you're a legal nerd and want to understand the strategy behind cases that have shaped our lives, then this is the podcast for you. If you're interested in the LGBTQ+ movement and the way history tends to repeat itself, then this is the podcast for you. Or if you're interested in the stories of real people who bravely refuse to stand down, Making the Case with Lambda Legal is the podcast for you. Starting June 9th, you'll be able to listen to full episodes of Making the Case with Lambda Legal. Be sure to subscribe to Making the Case with Lambda Legal wherever you listen to podcasts.
So, keep in mind, because this will be a recurring theme in today's presentation, we need to do the work outside of the courtroom in order to be victorious in our lawsuits. But we also need to make sure that we, and I speak in the general terms, we need to speak in ways that people can be receptive. And recalling the words, judges are people too. So keep that in mind as we go forward in this presentation today. So let's focus on GALDEF, its vision and mission. Our vision is a world where the rights of children to bodily integrity and future autonomy over their genitals and their sexuality are respected and legally protected. So our mission is threefold. Our mission is to create education programs in the legal community as well as the general public, and to build coalitions of support to defend children's bodily integrity rights in the courts and elsewhere. We also will strive to support impact litigation that expands the protection of at-risk children's bodily integrity, their genital autonomy, and their human rights. That support could include familiarizing attorneys with genital autonomy arguments that are published in legal, medical, ethics, and human rights journals, assisting plaintiffs with their costs, including legal retainer fees, assisting with reasonable legal costs like filing fees, discovery expenses, providing expert witnesses, and so forth, and possible financial reimbursement to attorneys willing to undertake groundbreaking litigation whose cases might ultimately be lost or dismissed. Our third mission point is to raise the money necessary to contribute to these legal costs of litigation that involve children at risk of genital cutting and those affected by cutting. And our motto is affirming rights, protecting choice, and redressing harm. So who exactly do we envision serving? Well, as I mentioned in the previous slide, children at risk of genital cutting and those affected by cutting. I've abbreviated that to CARTAC. These are people who are more susceptible to injustice, rights abuses, and legal neglect. And so we choose to prioritize but not limit our work on behalf of the following populations. These could be parents who were given insufficient, misleading, or no information before consenting to infant circumcision, including vulnerable immigrants who have little or no English language comprehension. Could be parents who were victimized by circumcision marketing that's promoted by hospitals, doctors, and other medical staff. It could be young male plaintiffs who've reached the age of 18 and therefore can initiate litigation for past harms and are seeking accountability for that harm. It could be circumcision sufferers who are seeking restitution for costs of medical or mental health services and or foreskin restoration. An idea that's being floated is the creation of state-based victim compensation funds. Uniquely situated in this service community would be transgender persons, specifically transgender women who were assigned male at birth and subjected to penile circumcision, and who are disadvantaged later in life during gender-affirming health care because of the circumcision, the lack of erogenous tissue there that could help rebuild their genitals. We could be assisting taxpayers who challenge Medicaid funding of newborn circumcisions. We could assist employees in healthcare, education, and other fields who might be victimized by workplace bias, discrimination, or termination just for speaking out for children's genital autonomy, and we might also see ourselves assisting whistleblowers who step forward to reveal systemic fraudulent diagnoses by physicians and hospitals who bill health insurers for non-existent problems and circumcisions that are easily avoided by less radical non-surgical alternatives. We at GALDEF live by a certain set of values that guide us in our work, and those values include promoting solidarity with female and intersex victims of genital cutting, and we recognize that some transgender people have also been harmed by penile circumcision. We recognize that diversity and inclusivity make us stronger as an organization, and that prejudice, bigotry, and hatred in any form is counterproductive to our mission. We are committed to promoting equality for all people, and we oppose all forms of discrimination on the basis of race, sex, age, religion, cultural background, sexual orientation, or gender identity. We have zero tolerance for prejudicial and divisive speech or deeds, and GALDEF endorses the statement opposing anti-Semitism within the genital autonomy movement, and you can find that statement at Beyond the Bris website. So this is our board of directors. Here in the upper left is myself, Tim Hammond. I'm the founder and president. We have Matthew Goodwin as our vice president, John Atkinson as treasurer, Andrew Little as secretary. This is our executive board. And then we have David Viviano, Dan McClymont, Ryan Jones, and David Balashinsky. Now, it doesn't appear visually at first that there's much diversity in this current board, but let me assure you that we are somewhat diverse. We have a number of members who identify as gay, and we have Jewish members as well, but we were always seeking to increase the diversity of our board. So we welcome women, people of color, and people of other religious backgrounds. We already have some very good endorsements of GALDEF. That includes J. Stephen Svoboda, the Executive Director of Attorneys for the Rights of the Child. We have Peter Adler, and we have David Llewellyn, who is known as the, quote, circumcision lawyer, and he said, "I think this is a great idea. We've needed such a fund for a long time. It would be wonderful to have a fund to support such litigation. If we had had a big fund in advance, I would have pushed to get involved in the Hieronymus case early on, and I think we might have had an entirely different result." By the way, Peter Adler made this endorsement by saying there are an endless number of lawsuits that can be brought for battery, breach of fiduciary duty, intentional fraud, and constructive fraud, as no healthy boy should ever be circumcised, to stop spite circumcisions, to end Medicaid funding in various statutes, to sue the American Academy of Pediatrics based on its guidelines, and also hospitals for false advertising and inadequate forms of parental permission. So I want to go back a little bit and take you back to 1996, in which the video documentary that I created, Whose Body, Whose Rights, talked about circumcision in political terms, and I'm proud to say that in early 2022, Whose Body, Whose Rights, because of the fact that it was aired on various PBS stations around the U.S., Whose Body, Whose Rights was inducted into the American Archive of Public Broadcasting. And KQED in San Francisco was kind enough during their two broadcasts of the documentary to send me telephone logs and letters from viewers, which were overwhelmingly positive. But this one particular letter caught my attention, and the viewer said, After watching your program on circumcision, I could not help but wonder whose and what the hidden agenda was. The stridency of the telecast was, to me, overwhelming, and if extrapolated, leads to the same kind of thinking of the abortion foes. Can you imagine this becoming a political issue? Well, I have news, folks. We have arrived. It is already a political issue. And because it's a political issue, I have good news. That the message is spreading, that even though males, females, and intersex people inhabit different bodies, we're all entitled to the same rights. And society is beginning to understand that the child's bodily integrity and individual autonomy are harmed by non-medically indicated genital surgeries, that it's a human rights issue. So our movement is gaining respect, and public perceptions will help to advance litigation. Remember from the podcast earlier, judges are people too. However, the news is not all good. What I find disturbing is what I have heard on social media about counterproductive languaging and counterproductive arguments that are being put forth that I don't think help our movement, and I don't think they help the general public to clearly understand this issue, and they certainly will not help in a court of law. And that is the promotion of this idea of circumcision as pedophilia. Now, historically, that term has been used by reactionary groups to objectify others as being dangerous to children. It's been used against gay people, it's been used against Jews, atheists, and so on. And now it's being used by various groups against their political opponents, meaning librarians, school boards, city councils, Democrats, and so forth. I believe it is not necessary, nor is it helpful, for intactivists to use this type of language. Our allies in the movement against female genital cutting and intersex genital cutting don't need to resort to this term. We need to keep it simple and clear. Remember, we need to speak in terms so that people can be receptive. Judges are people too. I believe the systemic problem with forced non-therapeutic genital cutting is not pedophilia, but circumcisionism. Now, if you've ever had the chance to read Travis Wisdom's articles on circumcisionism, this will not be a foreign word to you. If you have not read his articles on the subject, I would encourage you to do so. Travis defines circumcisionism as the hegemonic view that genital circumcision is a normative and acceptable practice. So this is just my word of caution that we're making progress, but using the wrong kind of languaging can hinder and even set us back in our progress. I do have some encouraging words to share with you. In April of 2022, I exchanged some emails with Professor Lawrence Tribe, who is a constitutional law professor at Harvard University, and he was very instrumental in bringing forth and defending LGBT rights at the Supreme Court and in other courts. And I sent him an email asking if he thought that it would be wise for us to challenge the federal anti-FGM statute on the grounds that it violated the 14th Amendment to equal protection. And he wrote back to me immediately, and he advised that he thought that courts are going to be wary of treading on legislative turf that by criminalizing conduct that the legislature opted not to outlaw when that statute was passed. But he does agree with us that these gender-based protections under federal statute create an inequitable and unsustainable legal situation. So I know that he is in our court. In particular, he said, as someone who is offended by that line on moral and philosophical grounds, and as someone whose life work has been wrapped up with matters of equal liberty and dignity, and who has devoted years to the LGBTQ cause, I'd eagerly take up the cudgels on your behalf if I thought the time was right to launch this kind of judicial challenge. He advised that the expansion of rights is not the exclusive province of the federal judiciary. He advised that litigating issues under state constitutions in state courts is an option that we should explore. And he said, beyond that, maybe first we should look to progressive state legislatures and eventually Congress to persuade them, after a suitable consciousness-raising campaign, to move in the direction that we have in mind. So those are some words of wisdom that I can share with you from Professor Lawrence Tribe. Also, there was more encouragement. In March of 2022, I met in Palm Springs with Kevin Jennings, who is the CEO of Lambda Legal Defense and Education Fund. And he came in March to do a fundraiser for Lambda Legal. In one afternoon, they raised $100,000 to defend the LGBTQ community from ongoing legislative and political attacks. When I met with him, I wasn't sure what his response would be, and I explained to him this idea, this proposal that I had for GALDEF, and his reaction was, genital autonomy? Just call it what it is, genital mutilation. So right then and there, I knew that he understood the issues, and he understands the intersectionality of the rights of LGBTQI people to exercise autonomy over our bodies and our lives, and the child's right to decide how much of their genitals they get to keep. So that's a bit of good news that I thought I'd share with you. So we're still in the building phase, and I'd like to encourage you to participate in any way that you can. We want to encourage diversity in our board and our advisory councils. We plan to have a legal and a medical advisory council. We need a fundraising subcommittee. We do have a really wonderful webmaster in Matt Goodwin, our vice president, but we need someone to take over the reins and maintain the website. We'll need graphic designers. We'll need a social media coordinator who can monitor our Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and LinkedIn accounts. And we need courageous attorneys who are willing to step forward and take on these really landmark cases that we hope to be creating. So I'll leave you with these words that were given to me by Hani Lightfoot Klein. She's the author of Prisoners of Ritual, a book about female genital mutilation in Africa. And she came from a Jewish family, and after interviewing a lot of people in Africa about female genital cutting, she wrote the book Prisoners of Ritual and included an entire chapter on male circumcision, and believes that this too is also a harmful practice, and it's a violation of the bodily autonomy rights of individuals. And she said to me once, if it were easy, someone would have done it by now. And I recall hearing Lawrence Tribe, Professor Lawrence Tribe, also saying there is always a path forward. So let's keep that in mind as we move forward with GALDEF. And to close, I'll just remind you, we are the Genital Autonomy Legal Defense and Education Fund. You can find us at galdef.org. We are a 501c3 nonprofit. You can subscribe to email updates from our homepage, and you can donate in many ways through Amazon Smile, Last Will and Testament bequests, by Cafe Press merchandise, employer matching gifts, PayPal, the PayPal Giving Fund. We also accept crypto, and through the Charity Charge MasterCard. So please do check out our website and visit us soon. And thank you for your attention.